Hello again, 102. In this video, we will continue in Chapter 30 with the first Clinton administration and some of the achievements and setbacks that resulted in that first administration. And Bill Clinton brought extraordinary gifts and oversized weaknesses to the presidency, and he mastered the personal touch, reassuring struggling people, "I feel your pain." Yet, while graced with charm and a common touch, as well as a commitment to fulfilling his campaign pledges, Clinton was also prone to self-absorption, self-deception, and self-inflicted wounds. He had some early setbacks with DADT and the abandonment of middle-class tax relief, and he abandoned his proposed middle-class tax cut in order to keep another campaign promise, to reduce the federal deficit. And then he dropped his promise to allow gays to serve in the armed forces after military commanders expressed strong opposition. Instead, he later announced an ambiguous new policy concerning gays in the military called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which allowed gays, lesbians, and bisexuals to serve in the military only if they kept their orientation secret. In the economy, and that was his big campaign slogan, as you'll recall, "It's the economy, stupid." And that's where he beat George Herbert Walker Bush. And there were some successes with NAFTA, higher taxes on the wealthy, and an economic stimulus package. Clinton proposed $241 billion in higher taxes for corporations and for the wealthiest individuals. He raised the top rate to 39.6%, and it's been adjusted down a bit from there in the 21st century. And this took place over 4 years, along with $255 billion in spending cuts. The congressional vote on the hotly contested bill was so close that Vice President Al Gore had to provide the tie-breaking vote. And for virtually the first time since 1945, Congress had passed a major bill without a single Republican vote, a troubling indication of the nation's growing partisan divide. And that's basically where we're still at. Clinton's deficit reduction effort worked as planned, however. It led to lower interest rates, which, along with low energy prices, a big reason for the boom of the late 1990s. This helped to spur dramatic economic growth throughout the 90s. And the North American Free Trade Act eliminated trade barriers signed in 1994 by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and this made North America the largest free trade zone in the world. And after NAFTA came the SHAFTA for some individuals. If you were involved in shipping and receiving, NAFTA was a boom. If you're involved in trucking or in shipping businesses, bringing things from overseas and then distributing them within the United States. But if you were involved in manufacturing and high-cost labor jobs, those jobs went away and they moved to the low labor areas of Mexico. And eventually, Mexico would face the same problem with competition from China later in the 21st century. Healthcare reform failed. By the summer of 1994, Clinton's bulky 1,364-page health insurance plan, developed by a 500-person task force of experts, headed by First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, rather than congressional leaders, was doomed, in part because the president opposed any changes to his wife's plan, and in part because the report was impossibly complicated. It was strenuously opposed by Republicans and healthcare interest groups, especially the pharmaceutical and insurance industries. Clinton's prized healthcare bill, officially called the Health Security Act, lost in Congress in August of 1994. And that led, then, in the midterm elections to a landslide Republican victory. And for the first time since 1952, the Republicans captured both houses of Congress. This is the first time they controlled the House of Representatives since the early 1950s. And the contract with America. And Speaker Newt Gingrich composed these campaign promises as a strategy for campaigning in the midterm, and it was quite successful. Gingrich and other Republican candidates for Congress rallied conservative voters by lambasting Clinton as an enemy of normal Americans. And they promised a contract with America, a pledge to dismantle the corrupt liberal welfare state created by Democrats eager to serve the undeserving poor. This sounds a lot like Reagan. And the 10-point anti-big government contract featured lower taxes, less regulation of businesses, less environmental protection. Term limits is a new one for members of Congress, reduction in social welfare programs, and a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget. As Texan Tom DeLay, a leading Republican in the House of Representatives, explained, "You got to understand, we're ideologues. We have an agenda. We have a philosophy." And in early 1995, Time magazine named Gingrich its Man of the Year. And this was conservative promises in response to the supposed liberalism of the Clinton administration. It was drafted mostly by Newt Gingrich and other congressional Republicans as a campaign tactic. Yet the much trumpeted contract with America quickly fizzled. Even with their control of Congress, the Republicans could only pass 4 minor elements of their contract. Gingrich's heavy-handed methods had backfired. Republican Senator Bob Dole said Gingrich was a one-man band who rarely took advice. He was too ambitious, too abrasive, and too divisive. And when Clinton refused to go along with Republican demands for a balanced budget pledge, Gingrich twice shut down the federal government during the fall of 1995, sending home 800,000 employees. That meant that Social Security checks were not mailed and passports were not approved, and all the national parks closed. And this tactic backfired, ladies and gentlemen. Older Americans, American Association for Retired People, did not go for not getting their Social Security checks at all. And by 1996, Gingrich had higher negative ratings in public surveys than the president. And the Supreme Court in race also reflects the conservative mood during the 90s. They undermined many affirmative action programs created by colleges in the 1960s to give African American students special consideration in admissions and financial aid awards. In 1996, 2 major steps challenged affirmative action in college admissions. In Hopwood versus Texas, a federal court outlawed race as a consideration for admission. And in 1995, the court in Ardoran Constructors Incorporated versus Pena declared that affirmative action programs affecting businesses had to be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling national interest. And again, that's how those programs started back in the 1960s. That the compelling national interest was to overcome past discrimination. But now the court is moving to the right in the 1990s, and they're moving away from race-based decisions. And these cases will come up to the court again about affirmative action in the Bollinger cases and Grutter in the 2010s. There was a legislative breakthrough with the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996. This was a comprehensive welfare reform measure aimed to decrease the size of the welfare state by limiting the amount of government unemployment aid to encourage its recipients to find jobs. And Bill Clinton shrewdly resolved to save his presidency by showing that he was a centrist, not a liberal. He co-opted much of the energy of the growing conservative movement when he reformed the federal system of welfare payments to the poor created during the 1930s under the New Deal. And basically, welfare today is a function of the states and where you live. Some states are more willing to disperse welfare benefits, others are not. And this leads into the 1996 campaign and the second Clinton administration.